Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and I hope that you're having a lovely day. This is Midday with Rev Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Rev Don, you can type your questions or comments into most any of the platforms that you might be watching on. They'll show up here in my chat room. The chat room is on the screen today because I don't have a guest, and we can all share it together. A few platforms may not translate directly into the chat room, but most of them do. And I love having conversation with you during this half hour. Yesterday, I was speaking more or less generally about spell work and kind of what that is, what's in it, and important principles to be guided by but not to be bound by. Today, I wanted to talk about mirror magic specifically. And mirror magic is one type of magic. And I was talking yesterday about how when I wrote the first degree materials for the Corellian tradition, for witch school, that I included a large section on spell work, but not in the sense of a cookbook of spells for people, but rather talking about different kinds of spell work, different ways that you approach this. But mirror work is one of the ways that you can approach this. I've not actually written very much about that, but I thought I'd talk about it today. And mirror magic goes back a long way in human history, and particularly in divination, which of course is a kind of magic. And it goes back farther than actual mirrors. The earliest example of using a mirrored surface in a magical context that I can speak to is using a mirrored surface for scrying. And what they used was a bowl of water. And to do this, the person doing the scrying, the person receiving the visions, would stare into the water, go into a trance, and receive visions. And hello to Bimby in the chat room. It's good to see you, Bimby. The person would then describe what they were seeing to a second person who would record and interpret the visions. And we find this attested as far ago as ancient Egypt. And for a long time, the way this was commonly done is that a child would be chosen to receive the visions, to stare into the bowl of water, to receive the visions, and an adult, usually of some sort of priesthood or magical training, would then interpret and record the visions. And this probably is still being done in some places even today. One of the more famous examples, Nostradamus used this practice on occasion. Over time, it became more common for people to sometimes use an adult to have the visions, and one of the most famous people for doing that is Edward Kelly. And you may be familiar with Edward Kelly as being the clairvoyant who worked with John Dee and brought through all of that Enochian material. And this is one of the ways they did that. And hello to Vivian in the chat room. And Vivian says, I'm just a few minutes behind Lol for the first time. I'm usually really late. So proud of myself. Oh, that's wonderful. It's good to see you, Vivian. But yes, this sort of scrying using the mirrored surface continued right up until the modern era, and there's still people who do it today. Today, however, it's more common for just one person to be both receiving and interpreting the visions. And it's a practice that you might do yourself alone or with a partner. And it's very simple. You just take your bowl of water and you go into a trance staring at the water to bring through the visions. You can also use something like a ring or a crystal ball for the same purpose. A ring, if it has like a shiny cabochon stone, is very good for this because it reacts as a mirrored surface. A crystal ball reacts as a mirrored surface, either an actual crystal ball made from crystal, or a glass crystal ball made from well, from glass. And people use both of these for crystal gazing, which is a kind of mirror magic because you're using the crystal as a mirror, or the ring as a mirror, or what have you. You can also use just a plain old mirror. Mirrors developed slowly over time. What we think of a mirror today is a relatively modern invention. And that is a piece of glass that's been silvered on the back for a reflective surface. If we go back thousands of years, the earlier mirrors were commonly made out of something like bronze or copper or silver that was polished to a high reflection and used as a mirror. If you look at ancient Egyptian mirrors, they're usually bronze or they're gilded. A few are silver, but silver was very valuable in ancient Egypt, so that's not terribly common, but you do see them. But you certainly wouldn't see a glass mirror. They did not have that technology. But mirrors were very important in ancient Egypt, and are heavily linked to the concept of life, the Ankh sign. And they were commonly reflective of that sign, and mirror cases were commonly made in that sign. Which speaks to the magic that mirrors were considered to possess. Over time, the ability to make mirrors developed. Eventually, we got glass mirrors like we have today. When people use mirrors for clairvoyance, for scrying, you can use an ordinary mirror. You can use any highly polished article. If you have a highly polished bronze mirror, you can use that as the ancients might have done. And of course, black mirrors are very popular in modern occult circles. Not so much in traditional use, but very much in modern use. And a lot of this comes down from the aforementioned Dr. John Dee. And he had what he called shoe stones, which were mirrored objects he used for clairvoyance. And one of them was a mirror made from obsidian, which had come from the New World during the conquest and had been of Mexica origin and can still be seen today. And this, I think, is part of what really popularized the idea of black mirrors. And they really, I think, come much more out of New World practice that has merged with Old World practice, and I think that's wonderful. Today, however, black mirrors are very common, and what is often done to make a black mirror is you take a sheet of glass and you paint the back of it black, and it will give you a mirrored surface that you scry through. And hello to Nicholas in the chat room. It's good to see you, Nicholas. And you do this by going into a trance as you look into the mirrored surface. These are some of the more common ways that mirrors are used in magic, but there are, of course, many others. The other thing about mirrors and any reflective substance is that they can be used for defensive magic. And this is a very common way to use a mirror magically. And also reflective stones like hematite. And the idea is that the reflection turns away negativity. The most common thing that people do with this is that they will have a mirror near the entrance to their home. I was raised with the idea that you put the mirror in one of the front windows to reflect any negativity back outside. And usually it would be like a lady's compact or any small mirror that was not overly noticeable. And you put it in the window to be the basis of your barrier reflecting negativity. Another thing you can do, though, is to hang a mirror on the wall just inside that front door so that when the door opens, the mirror is right there to reflect negativity. That also is an example of this practice. My late mother had a number of pieces of jewelry, some of which I've shown on here before, which had a mirrored surface that could be worn for defensive reasons in this way, the mirror reflecting any negativity that might be sent towards her. But To anyone looking, it was just a nice little gold or silver pin with a flat surface. This makes a very nice tie tack on occasion as well, both because the flat mirrored surface reflects negativity, but it also doesn't make anyone wonder what you're doing. It just looks like a piece of jewelry. It's a very nice way to use a mirror for defensive magic. Rings can be used this way as well. There are a number of different ways that you can have a reflective ring that you can use as part of a psychic barrier to reflect negativity. And wearing that ring isn't going to tell anyone that you're doing this. It's just going to look like a ring, and yet it can be very, very magical, very magically empowered. This is another major use of mirrors in magic. You will also see this in particularly in fashion from certain cultures around the world, where mirrors are used as part of the costume on a regular basis. Part of the reason for that is to reflect negativity. And you'll see that sometimes in the contemporary pagan community as well. The mirrors appear to be decoration, but they're also there for defensive purposes. And this is a good thing to remember, and something that you can do. And hello to Reverend Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. There are all kinds of different things that you can do with mirrors for defensive purposes that don't appear to be defensive to anyone else unless they know. And, in the times that we often find ourselves living in, both the current time and many other times in history, it can be useful to have discrete metaphysical defense mechanisms around you. And this is one that you can use. Other things people do with mirrors include dimensional magic. And this can be done in a number of ways, but mirrors are often thought to be a way of looking into another dimension through scrying, even a doorway into other dimensions if you open it in a certain way. And you'll see people using mirrors for this purpose. At the original site of Holy City Temple, there's a lot of mirror magic that was done. And that particular site had highly polished marble floors, which acted as mirrors. And I remember in particular a ritual that involved placing candles at certain points in that hallway that was extremely atmospheric and very multidimensional as it was put together. I'm not going to go into a lot of details about how to put together a multidimensional ritual on this program, because I think it's one of those things that you need to have some experience before you start working with. But we talk about that sort of thing more in, for example, my book on third degree lessons, which talks about things like time magic and multidimensionality. I am not a great believer in the idea that you often find in the metaphysical community that magic is so dangerous, you should be afraid, you should be very worried about practicing magic. For the most part, it's not, in my opinion. However, the exception to that is as you start to work with the higher range issues, things like multidimensionality, things like time magic, there's a certain danger in that. And the danger isn't what people are going to tell you, oh, you accidentally manifested something you didn't want. Well, then you manifest something different. The danger is unraveling your connection to what we perceive as the real world. That is the one big danger of high-level magic that I will warn people about. You want to be very well grounded and have a strong sense of yourself before you start doing that level of magic. Because when you start to realize how fluid things like time and space can be, that there are such things as parallel dimensions, and that you can move between them, you can easily lose your place in reality if you're not firmly grounded. Now, in Kabbalah, at least in certain forms of Kabbalah, there used to be a point of view that no one should study Kabbalah unless they were over 40 years old and married with children. Um, Not a point of view I agree with, except that the point of this was that so they would be so well grounded in the real world that studying these higher levels of magic could not completely distract them from it or completely destroy their concept of reality. These are very important things, and not quite where I thought I would go with mirror magic, but on the other hand, when you think about it, it's completely in keeping with mirror magic. When you look in a mirror, you're seeing another version of reality. Um, Same with a camera. When you look into a camera, when I sit here and look at my computer, I am seeing another version of myself. And that version of myself is mirrored from the actual version of myself. Um, so there's already a little difference there. But when you work with these things, you realize that they can be the gateway to researching the great differences that can exist between one dimension and another, between one version of reality and another. Years ago, there was a program called Sliders. It's not the only one that ever dealt with this subject, but it's the primary one of my generation. And in this program, they were going from one parallel dimension to another every week, occasionally a couple during a week. And it really explored this idea in some interesting ways. And one of the things that I thought they handled very well was the idea that sometimes it's only a tiny little difference. Um, oh, and hello to Ricardo Galvan in the chat room. And Ricardo says, Sliders was a great show. It was. I quite enjoyed Sliders, partly because I recognized the subject matter they were dealing with from my own metaphysical background, even though they did not explore it in a metaphysical premise, but still, same subject. But sometimes, and this is true, you can go from one reality to the next parallel reality, and there are only tiny little differences. You won't necessarily be able to immediately tell you've even done it. And this is something I think that happens to people all the time. Because the truth is, we are multidimensional beings. And we do go back and forth on a fairly regular basis that we're not consciously aware of. And this is part of where we get that so-called Mandela effect. Why some people remember certain things from the past that are drastically different from what other people remember. And that's because people are going back and forth from one reality to another where the pasts are not exactly the same. And I've had this happen in my own life, both intentionally and unintentionally, where something that I knew absolutely had happened turns out not to have happened. Or something that I was reasonably sure could never have happened turns out to have happened. And even occasionally where someone whose death I very strongly remember is still living, because in one parallel reality they deceased and in another they did not. This is the kind of thing that you encounter in high-level magic that can endanger your sense of reality if you're not very well grounded. It's only one of the many reasons I focus on grounding from day one in instructions about magic. It is the strongest and most important thing that I can advise. And the farther you go, the more important it is. And Nicholas says, did you happen to see the movie from about 8 years ago called Oculus? I did not, so I can't really comment on that, but I'm assuming it was about this general subject. And I know, as a believer in multiple parallel realities, that my own story is undoubtedly different in several different universes, including one where I died in 1990, 1991, one where I died 2 years ago, one where I was not sick 2 years ago. I firmly believe that most major possibilities diverge into different timelines. We can learn to look into these, we can learn to pass between them, and unconsciously, we do it frequently. And Vivian says the Mandela effect is absolutely insane to think about or figure out, especially if you're not grounded, which many of us truly are not. Weird times. And yeah, that's why grounding is so important when doing this kind of work. Um, when you realize how fluid reality can be, it's one thing when we're doing small level magic, where we're just trying to affect one or two things. It's not going to unravel too much for us, but as we get into higher and higher magic, it's very important to be grounded. When you realize that, yes, magic can affect that job situation or that romantic situation or um, that other situation, your attitude toward reality must be slightly different because you see that it can be adjusted. The extent to which it can be adjusted is much greater than we normally deal with. Now, doing that intentionally is not necessarily an easy thing. I can think of a number of things I would like to adjust at this moment that are beyond my ability to do, but not because I doubt they're possible, because the things that I have experienced as possible tell me that they are, but they're a little bit more than I am simply able to shift. Um, and maybe I need to try harder. We'll see. Um, but, years ago, we had a Corellian high priest who was a professor of math, actually at Danville Area Community College. And his comment was that the reason that so many people hate math is the way that it's taught. That math was actually a wonderfully interesting introduction to the structure of the universe once you started dealing with theoretical math, but for whatever reason, this was kept out of mathematics instructions until you reached a high level. And he thought that if you introduced more of these ideas earlier on, students would be far more interested. And although I agree with that, I also think that it's the same thing we're talking about here, that when you start to look at the actual complexity of these situations, it can be very ungrounding if you're not sufficiently grounded when you go in. Bimby says, do you think it's possible that when we die in one reality, unless it's of great old age, that we just survive in another reality and keep on living our lives? Yes, to some extent, I do believe that. One of the earliest metaphysical teachings that I remember was my grandmother's teaching that if when we end this life we're not satisfied with it, we can repeat it, which I now understand as being simultaneous and having to do with the illusory nature of time. But in terms of how we experience it, it may very well seem like repeating rather than multiple dimensions. But yes, I think that that for many of us, I don't think that our lives end in the same place in all of these different dimensions. And it's just a matter of where our point of consciousness is at any given moment. Um, when you go, when your consciousness goes from one dimension to another, which again is something you can learn to do, it doesn't mean that first dimension ceases to exist or that you're not still there. It means your consciousness has changed its focus, which is a very complicated idea. And if you've never heard that idea before, it might take a little bit to wrap your head around it. But once you understand it, it explains a lot of things. And one of the questions I'm often asked is, how do I reconcile the idea of ancestral veneration and reincarnation? And this basically kind of is the answer to that. The nature of the soul and the nature of time is such that it's not one single stream. The soul has many different existences all going at once, including those ancestral personalities that remain and all the different versions of every incarnation. And Vivian says, "Oh gosh, I really don't want to repeat this life on Earth." And I'm afraid that's really not one of the choices that we necessarily get. I do believe, however, there's another old film called The Adding Machine, which I think really illustrates this point very well. About half of that movie is set in the afterlife. And they portray the afterlife as this vast carnival where you can do anything you want to do. There's no reward, there's no punishment. It's just everything you could ask for to have fun with to your heart's content. And how you react to that is based on where your soul is at. And some of the characters are having a wonderful time. And most of them hear a wonderful, beautiful music playing in the background. But some of the characters are just miserable despite having everything they could ask for, and they hear no music. Because they're just not ready for that. And they will be drawn back into this world of incarnation because they're not ready to stay indefinitely out of it. I tend to think that's how it is. I don't think we're made to come back. I think we're drawn back because we're not complete yet. We have not learned everything we need to get from this world yet. And until we've done that, we come back. The way they put it in that film, which was originally a play, is that only the most blessed remain. Anyone can, but only the most blessed do. Meaning that you don't have to come back to another life on Earth. But unless you have achieved that point where you don't need it, you will. Eventually, it will just be time and you will be drawn back to it because you must continue to have the growth that this world offers that world does not. And my understanding is that one of the biggest parts of this world is growth and transformation. This is not the place for stasis. It's not the place for a constant plateau. It's not the place for, quote, perfection, end quote. It's a place to grow and transform. The other world, I believe we can still work on anything that we've opened the door to, but it's not a place that offers us the same levels of growth and transformation. That's why we come here. And why, until we reach that level where we don't need it anymore, we will continue to. But I don't think we're forced, so you don't need to worry about that. And with that, I see it's time for a word from our sponsors. Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours. And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. Our next Metaphysical and Magic Auction will be February 28th at 7 p.m. Central Time. I hope you'll join us for that. I thank you for joining me for today's program. I hope that you have found it interesting and enjoyable. And let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to remain grounded and centered as we deal with all of the many things that life brings us, especially if we are walking the path of high magic. Help us to always have a good understanding of what we are doing and retain our sense of self and place as we do it. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love, knowing you're always with us. From respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always, and I will see you again